At a lavish family reunion, Evelyn arrived hoping for connection, but instead her sister humiliated her in front of everyone by denying her a place to stay. What Evelyn did next not only stunned her family, but exposed secrets they desperately wanted to hide. How far would you go to stand up for yourself? If this opening sparks your curiosity, hit the like button and drop a comment below. Have you ever been in a situation where standing your ground felt impossible? Share your story. We're listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will leave you questioning, inspired, and coming back for more. Evelyn Hart sat cross-legged on the soft gray rug of her Denver apartment, the rhythmic hum of a jazz playlist blending with the muffled sounds of the bustling street below. On the coffee table before her, an elegant invitation card lay open, its gold-embossed letters glinting under the glow of a nearby lamp. Thanksgiving dinner at the Rosewood Mansion. The words seemed to pulse, mocking her as she stared at them. She reached for the card hesitantly, her fingers brushing its edge as if it might sting. Memories unfurled, sharp and unrelenting. Evelyn could see herself at 13, standing at the kitchen doorway as her parents beamed at Claudia. It was Thanksgiving then, too. Claudia had won some regional debate competition, a predictable victory, Evelyn thought bitterly now, and Richard and Margaret Hart had spared no effort in showing their pride. There had been a grand toast in Claudia's honor, complete with her father's rare bottle of champagne, while Evelyn's small science award the previous month had been acknowledged with a quick, "Good job, honey," before the conversation had shifted. Her chest tightened at the recollection, the weight of being overlooked settling on her once again. She let out a slow breath and returned her gaze to the card. Its pristine design, so polished, so deliberate, reminded her of her family's obsession with appearances. On the outside, the Harts were the perfect family, their wealth and sophistication drawing admiration at every turn. But Evelyn had spent years seeing what lay beneath the surface, a world of favoritism and silent reproach, where she was always the one on the periphery. She glanced toward the side table where a photo in a silver frame caught her eye. It was from last summer, a candid shot of her and Amelia in a park. Evelyn was kneeling, her hands holding a makeshift crown of daisies Amelia had woven. Amelia's expression was wide-eyed and unfiltered, her grin lighting up the frame. It was the kind of joy Evelyn rarely found within her family's walls. Evelyn picked up the frame, her thumb brushing over Amelia's tiny hand in the photo. "Aunt Evie, will you be at Thanksgiving?" The memory of her niece's voice, bright and hopeful, echoed in her mind. "I made something special for you. You have to come." Her lips curved into a faint smile. Amelia was the one person who saw Evelyn, not the shadow of Claudia or the daughter who had never quite gotten it right, but simply Evelyn. Her thoughts drifted to the times Amelia would sneak away from her parents' sharp arguments, crawling into Evelyn's lap during family gatherings. "Tell me about your adventures," she would say, her young eyes wide with curiosity. It was those moments that made the rest bearable. Evelyn set the photo down and turned back to the invitation. She picked it up this time, turning it over in her hands. The weight of the cardstock felt heavier than it should, like a physical manifestation of her conflicted emotions. "Do I really want to do this?" she thought, her stomach knotting. But it wasn't about wanting to. It was about Amelia. The little girl deserved better than the toxicity that pervaded the Hart family. Maybe Evelyn couldn't change her parents or Claudia, but she could be there for Amelia. She could show her that there was another way to live, a way outside the suffocating pressure of perfection. The decision was made before she realized she had reached for her laptop. The screen flickered to life and her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She hesitated, her chest tight with a mix of anxiety and resolve. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. She glanced at the screen. Thomas Green. A small laugh escaped her as she picked up. "Hey," she said, her voice tinged with weariness. "Please tell me you're not actually thinking about going," Thomas said without preamble. His voice was warm, but carried an edge of disbelief. Evelyn leaned back, running a hand through her hair. "I am. Amelia asked me to come." There was a pause, followed by an audible sigh. "Evelyn," Thomas began, his tone softening, "you know exactly how this will go. Claudia will flaunt her perfection. Your parents will fawn over her, and you'll get stuck at the kids' table metaphorically, if not literally." "It's not for them," Evelyn said firmly. "It's for Amelia." Thomas's silence spoke volumes, but when he finally replied, his voice was steadier. "Fine, but promise me something. Don't let them drag you down. You've come too far to let their nonsense make you question yourself." "I'll try," she said. though she wasn't entirely sure she could keep the promise. The days leading up to her flight were a blur. Evelyn threw herself into her work, sketching floor plans and choosing palettes for clients in hopes that the busyness would drown out her nerves. But the unease lingered, rising each time she glanced at her suitcase, neatly packed and waiting in the corner of her room. She had chosen her outfits carefully, nothing too flashy, nothing that would draw Claudia's inevitable critique. The morning of her departure arrived too soon. Evelyn climbed into the back of a taxi, her gaze lingering on the snow-dusted streets of Denver. The city felt steady, comforting, a stark contrast to the emotional minefield she was heading into. She checked her phone during the ride, scanning her emails one last time. Among them was a message from Claudia, "Looking forward to seeing you at Thanksgiving. Don't forget to bring your sense of humor." Evelyn frowned, rereading the line. It wasn't an outright insult, but the condescension was unmistakable. She imagined Claudia's smirk as she typed it, her voice dripping with faux charm. By the time she boarded the plane, Evelyn's nerves were taut. She settled into her window seat, the engines roaring as the aircraft prepared for takeoff. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Amelia. "Can't wait to see you, Aunt Evie." A genuine smile broke across Evelyn's face as she read it. Amelia's enthusiasm was pure, unburdened by the complications of adult relationships. Evelyn let the thought carry her through the ascent, the lights of Denver fading beneath the clouds. But as the plane leveled off, unease crept back in. Claudia's message echoed in her mind, her words laced with the same passive aggressiveness that had always cut deep. Evelyn gripped the armrest, reminding herself of the promise she had made, to herself, to Thomas, and most of all, to Amelia. This time would be different. She wasn't the same girl who had once swallowed her pride for the sake of peace. This time, she would stand her ground. The plane touched down with a jolt, the wheels screeching as they met the runway. Evelyn Hart gripped the armrest, startled from the restless haze of her thoughts. Outside the window, the Dallas skyline glittered under a canopy of holiday lights, twinkling displays wrapped around lampposts and illuminated storefronts. But to Evelyn, it all felt hollow, like a picture-perfect postcard, far removed from the messy reality she was about to face. As the plane taxied to the gate, Evelyn retrieved her bag from under the seat, her movements mechanical. Around her, passengers bustled with excitement, their chatter filled with plans for reunions, celebrations, and joy. She envied them, their simplicity, their certainty. Her own plans felt more like a tightrope walk, one misstep away from unraveling years of carefully built independence. Once she disembarked, Evelyn moved deliberately through the terminal, her mind churning with anticipation. She rehearsed imaginary conversations with Claudia, her parents, even Amelia. She tried to predict their words, their judgments, but the weight of it clung to her no matter how prepared she thought she was. Outside the airport, a blast of crisp evening air greeted her. She hailed a taxi, climbing in with a quick nod to the driver. As the car merged into Dallas traffic, the city unfolded in bursts of festive cheer, illuminated wreaths hung from shop doors, bustling holiday markets sprawled on corners, and choirs sang carols on the sidewalks. Evelyn leaned back, letting the hum of the city wash over her. It was a stark contrast to the tension coiling in her chest. Her phone buzzed, the familiar name Thomas Green lighting up the screen. Relief bloomed as she answered. "Thomas," she said, her voice lighter than she felt, "please tell me you're calling to save me." "Save you?" Thomas's laugh was warm and teasing. "Not a chance. You bought this ticket to the circus. You're just gonna have to stick the landing." Despite herself, Evelyn smiled. "So much for moral support." "Hey, I never promised moral support," he quipped, his tone softening. "But seriously, how bad is it? Have they started yet?" "Not yet," Evelyn replied, glancing out at the twinkling city as the taxi turned onto a wide boulevard. "I'm on my way to the hotel. It's beautiful here. I almost forgot how much Dallas does for the holidays." "Well, don't let the sparkle fool you. It's still Dallas," Thomas said, his voice dropping an octave for dramatic effect. "Home of the great Claudia Hart, queen of veiled insults and passive-aggressive domination." Evelyn snorted, shaking her head. "She's not that bad." "Don't defend her, Evelyn," Thomas cut in, his voice firm but kind. "She spent years undermining you, and we both know it. You don't owe her anything." "It's not about her," Evelyn murmured, watching the Rosewood mansion come into view. The grand estate loomed against the skyline, its Italian Renaissance facade bathed in golden light. Arched windows sparkled like jewels, and the pristine symmetry of the landscaping gave the impression of a world untouched by chaos. Evelyn swallowed hard. "It's about Amelia. She deserves better." "And she's lucky to have you," Thomas said, his tone softening again. "But don't lose yourself in this, okay? You've built something amazing, Evelyn. Don't let them make you feel small again." "I'll try," Evelyn said quietly, though doubt lingered in her heart. As the taxi pulled to a stop, a fragrant gust of jasmine and citrus greeted her, a calculated touch of luxury that carried her back to childhood. She froze, overwhelmed by a sudden memory, her mother brushing jasmine oil onto Claudia's hair for a family photo. Evelyn had stood awkwardly to the side, forgotten until her father called for her to stand straighter and stop slouching. The image cut through her like an icy wind, but she shook it off, willing herself to focus on the present. Inside, the Rosewood Mansion's lobby was a masterpiece of excess. Vaulted ceilings soared above, adorned with crystal chandeliers that cast cascading light onto polished marble floors. The walls were painted in warm golds and creams, accented by intricate moldings. Every detail felt curated to perfection, yet the space felt cold, sterile even. Evelyn adjusted her coat, her footsteps echoing faintly as she approached the reception desk. "Evelyn, there you are!" Claudia's voice rang out, sweet and sharp all at once. Evelyn turned, forcing herself to meet her sister's gaze. Claudia approached with practiced poise, her fitted dress and polished demeanor reflecting the same pristine perfection as the mansion itself. Her smile was wide, but Evelyn caught the faint flicker of judgment in her sister's eyes as they swept over her simple, understated outfit. "You look lovely," Claudia said, her tone hovering just shy of insincerity. "Very classic." "Thank you," Evelyn replied evenly. "You look exactly as expected." Claudia's lips twitched, but she didn't respond. Behind her, Richard and Margaret Hart stood in quiet observation. Their expressions were carefully composed, revealing nothing of their true feelings. Evelyn wasn't sure whether they were relieved or disappointed by her arrival. The tension was broken by a burst of energy as Amelia darted forward, her face lighting up. "Aunt Evie!" she cried, throwing herself into Evelyn's arms. The warmth of Amelia's embrace melted a fraction of Evelyn's unease. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, kneeling to meet Amelia's eager gaze. "I missed you. I made something for you." Amelia beamed, holding up a folded piece of paper. Evelyn unfolded it carefully, revealing a crayon drawing of a treehouse surrounded by flowers. "It's beautiful," Evelyn said, her throat tightening. "Thank you, Amelia, I love it." Amelia grinned. "It's our treehouse, for when you come visit me." Evelyn felt the sting of unshed tears but managed a smile. "I'll visit soon, I promise." Behind them, Claudia cleared her throat, her polite veneer slipping. "Come on, Amelia. Aunt Evie needs to get ready for dinner." Amelia reluctantly let go, her wide eyes meeting Evelyn's. "Don't be late, okay?" "I won't," Evelyn promised, her voice steady despite the heaviness around her. As Amelia was led away, Evelyn caught a hushed exchange between Claudia and Margaret. "I can't believe she wore that," Claudia whispered, her voice low but not low enough. "Shh," Margaret replied, darting a quick glance toward Evelyn before looking away. Evelyn's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay composed. This time, she wouldn't let them see her falter. The grand doors of the Rosewood Mansion loomed before Evelyn as she approached, her heels clicking faintly against the cobblestone driveway. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and citrus wafting from the perfectly manicured gardens. Warm golden light spilled from the tall windows, casting long shadows across the driveway. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, adjusting the strap of her leather bag as unease swirled in her chest. This wasn't her world. It never had been. Her family had always made sure she felt like an outsider. Evelyn glanced down at her suitcase, its worn edges a stark contrast to the pristine surroundings. The bag, a reminder of her independence and resilience, felt heavier tonight, not just from clothes, but from the emotional weight of the evening ahead. Inside, the lobby was breathtakingly opulent. Vaulted ceilings adorned with cascading crystal chandeliers glittered like falling stars, and the polished marble floors gleamed underfoot. Plush seating areas, arranged with clinical precision, exuded luxury in shades of cream and gold. The hum of conversation mixed with the faint strains of classical music, creating an ambiance of effortless sophistication. But to Evelyn, it felt cold, artificial, the kind of perfection that demanded silence, not connection. She moved toward the reception desk, her steps measured, her pulse quickening. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Rosewood Mansion." The young receptionist greeted her with a professional smile, his name tag gleaming under the light. "How may I assist you?" "I'm checking in," Evelyn replied, offering a polite nod. "The reservation should be under Evelyn Hart." The receptionist's fingers flew across the keyboard as he searched for her name. His smile faltered, replaced by a furrowed brow. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see a reservation under that name." Evelyn's stomach tightened. She leaned in slightly, her voice steady but firm. "Could you check again, please? My sister, Claudia Hart, made the arrangements. There must be a mistake." The receptionist nodded, his expression apologetic as he continued typing. After a few moments, he looked up, shaking his head. "I've checked thoroughly, ma'am. There's no reservation listed for you." Before Evelyn could respond, Claudia's unmistakable voice cut through the air. "Oh, Evelyn!" Claudia's tone was light, almost playful, but her words carried the sharp edge of a blade. "There you are. I thought you'd be here earlier." Evelyn turned slowly, her face carefully neutral. Claudia approached with a practiced grace, her tailored dress shimmering under the chandelier lights. She looked every bit the image of effortless perfection, but her eyes glinted with something harder, something colder. "I was just explaining to the receptionist," Evelyn said, her voice calm, "that my reservation seems to have been misplaced." Claudia's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, that. Yes, I meant to tell you. With all the last-minute changes, I couldn't get a room for you here. But you're so resourceful, Evelyn. I knew you'd figure something out." Evelyn's grip on her suitcase tightened, her knuckles whitening. She noticed out of the corner of her eye her parents standing by the far end of the lobby. Richard Hart's expression was unreadable, his attention drifting between his phone and Evelyn's plight, as if it were a mild inconvenience. Margaret Hart's lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting away whenever Evelyn's gaze neared her. Neither of them spoke, their silence cutting deeper than words. "I see," Evelyn said evenly, refusing to let her voice waver. Claudia's smile sharpened, her tone dripping with feigned concern. "You always manage, don't you? It's one of your best qualities. If it's an issue, I could speak to the manager, but I'm sure you'd prefer to handle it on your own." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a faint smile that mirrored Claudia's false sincerity. "How thoughtful of you, Claudia. Truly." The receptionist looked between the two women, his discomfort evident. Evelyn turned to him and said gently, "Thank you for your help. I'll make other arrangements." As Evelyn walked away from the desk, the sound of her suitcase wheels echoed faintly in the vast lobby. She felt Claudia's gaze lingering on her like a weight, a silent confirmation of her sister's triumph. Her parents said nothing, did nothing, merely standing on the sidelines as if they were spectators at a show. Her chest ached with the familiar sting of being dismissed, of being made to feel small. Yet beneath the humiliation, there was a spark of something else, resolve. This wasn't new. She had endured this for years, but something about tonight felt different. Evelyn didn't just want to endure anymore. She wanted to rise. Outside, the night air felt sharper against her skin. Evelyn's suitcase rolled unevenly over the cobblestones as she headed toward the taxi stand. She glanced up at the mansion's glowing windows, each one a reflection of the world she had never belonged to, the world that had never welcomed her. The valet approached, handing her bag into the trunk of the waiting car. She slid into the back seat, her composure finally cracking as the door closed behind her. A surge of frustration and sadness welled up, but Evelyn swallowed it down, her breath shaky but determined. As the taxi pulled away, Evelyn glanced back at the Rosewood mansion, its grandeur fading into the distance. For the first time, she realized she didn't feel the need to look back anymore. Evelyn leaned back in the taxi's seat, her head resting against the window as the city lights flickered outside. The rhythmic hum of the tires on the pavement was usually calming, but tonight, it was drowned out by the echoes of Claudia's smirk and their parents' silence. Her chest ached with the weight of the evening's humiliation, but beneath that ache simmered something sharper, defiance. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down to see a message from Thomas. "How's the royal treatment so far?" A humorless laugh escaped her lips. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she replied. "Claudia didn't even bother to book me a room. Said I'd manage." Thomas's response was immediate. "That's her style, making cruelty look effortless. Don't let her win." Evelyn sighed, her grip tightening around the phone. "Don't let her win." The words clung to her, sparking a flicker of determination. She glanced at the city rushing past, her reflection superimposed over the glittering skyline. It was a face she barely recognized, tired but resolute. She wasn't going to let Claudia dictate her worth any longer. When she arrived at her hotel, Evelyn moved through check-in on autopilot, her thoughts swirling. The room was modest but cozy, with warm lighting and a soft armchair by the window. She set her suitcase down and sank into the chair, staring out at the distant lights of the Rosewood mansion. It gleamed like a false beacon, beautiful but hollow. Evelyn's mind wandered back to a Thanksgiving years ago. She was 17, wearing a dress she'd spent weeks saving up for. The dress had been perfect, or so she'd thought, until her mother's cutting words shattered her pride. "It's nice, but it doesn't suit you like Claudia's dress does." Evelyn had plastered on a smile, pretending the comment didn't sting, but later that night she had cried alone in her room, hating herself for caring so much. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling sharply. That memory, like so many others, had stayed buried for years, a scar she had carried in silence. But tonight, it rose to the surface, raw and unyielding. Her gaze fell to her laptop on the desk. It felt like a weight, an object demanding action. She stood, opened it, and stared at the blank email screen. Thomas's words echoed in her mind. "Change the game. Don't play by their rules." Slowly, she began to type, the words pouring out like a dam breaking. "Dear family, tonight was a reminder of what I've always known. I don't fit into the world you've created. For years, I've tried to find my place within it, to earn your approval, but it's clear that space was never meant for me. But I'm not writing this to complain or to blame. I'm writing because I need to say what's been left unsaid for too long. I've built a life I'm proud of, a life on my terms, not shaped by anyone's expectations. The facade of perfection that some of us cling to will eventually crumble. I trust we're all prepared for that day. Evelyn." She read the email twice, her hands trembling. The words weren't angry, they were a declaration. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the send button. Then with a deep breath, she clicked it. The relief was immediate, like a weight lifted off her chest. She closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The act of sending that email wasn't just about confronting her family, it was about reclaiming her voice. Back at the Rosewood mansion, Claudia sat in her suite, scrolling through her phone with a glass of wine in hand. When Evelyn's email appeared in her inbox, she hesitated, her brow furrowing. The subject line, "For the Hearts," felt ominous. Claudia opened it, her confidence faltering as she read. Each line cut deeper than the last, peeling back the layers of the persona she had spent years perfecting. Her carefully constructed world felt suddenly fragile, and for the first time in years, Claudia felt fear, not of Evelyn, but of the truth she might reveal. She reread the line. "The facade of perfection that some of us cling to will eventually crumble." Claudia's hands trembled as she set her phone down. What would Evelyn do next? What if she aired everything, the debts, the lies, the cracks Claudia had worked so hard to cover? Her stomach churned as she imagined the fallout. In the suite next door, Richard and Margaret sat in silence, reading the email on Richard's tablet. Margaret's lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting nervously to her husband. "She's angry," Margaret murmured. "She's honest," Richard corrected, his tone heavy with guilt. He set the tablet down and rubbed his temples. "We should have seen this coming." Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Deep down, she knew Richard was right. Evelyn's words weren't just a critique of Claudia. They were an indictment of the family as a whole. Evelyn stared out at the city lights, her heart still racing. She wasn't sure what the fallout from her email would be, but for the first time she felt a sliver of peace. The control she had always lacked was now firmly in her hands. Her phone buzzed again, a new message from Claudia. Evelyn's breath hitched as she opened it. "Nice speech. Let's hope you're prepared for the consequences." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she refused to let the fear take hold. Claudia's words weren't a threat. They were proof that Evelyn had struck a nerve. She set her phone down and returned to the window, watching the distant lights of the Rosewood mansion. It might have been a symbol of her family's power and perfection, but tonight Evelyn felt stronger. For the first time, she wasn't just enduring their games, she was playing her own. Claudia sat on the edge of her meticulously made bed, the light from her phone casting a pale glow on her face. Evelyn's email sat open on the screen, her words sharp and unrelenting. Claudia read it again, hoping to find some way to dismiss it as overdramatic or exaggerated, but she couldn't. Her sister's calm yet pointed tone cut deeper with every reread. "The facade of perfection some of us cling to will eventually crumble." Her chest tightened. The phrase felt like a thread, tugging at the carefully woven tapestry of her life. Claudia's fingers hovered over the screen, her instinct to respond warring with a growing sense of dread. She didn't need to look far to know what Evelyn was implying. If her sister truly intended to pull the curtain back on Claudia's financial missteps, everything could unravel: her reputation, her marriage, her family's trust. "Claudia?" Mark's voice pulled her back to the present. She looked up to see him standing in the doorway, his tie loosened and an inquisitive look in his eyes. His presence, usually steadying, now felt like a threat. "You've been quiet all evening. Everything okay?" he asked, his tone light but probing. She forced a smile, hoping it would be enough to deflect his concern. "Just tired. Long day." Mark wasn't convinced. He stepped closer, his gaze landing on the phone in her hand. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the screen. "Nothing important," Claudia said quickly, locking the phone and placing it face down on the nightstand. "Just an email from Evelyn." Mark raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "Evelyn? That's not a name I hear often around here. What did she say?" Claudia waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, you know how she is, always trying to stir the pot." Mark's silence stretched and Claudia's pulse quickened. He studied her for a moment longer, his gaze steady and unnervingly perceptive. "It's not about money, is it?" Claudia's stomach dropped. "Because lately things haven't been adding up," he continued, his voice calm but firm. "The credit card bills, the missed payments. Claudia, if something's going on, I need to know." Her carefully constructed composure began to crack. "Mark, it's nothing I can't handle," she said, her voice faltering. "Things have just been tight." Mark crossed his arms, his disappointment cutting deeper than anger. "Tight? Claudia, we live in a house your parents paid for, drive cars they bought us, and go on vacations they fund. Tight doesn't explain why I'm finding overdue notices hidden in the desk drawer." Claudia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth felt too dangerous, too final to say out loud. Mark shook his head, his expression a mixture of frustration and sadness. "You're always trying to keep up appearances, but it's not just about you anymore. It's about us. And I can't keep pretending everything's fine when I know it's not." Claudia sat frozen as Mark turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall. For years, she had managed to keep the cracks in her perfect image hidden, but Evelyn's email felt like a spotlight, illuminating everything she'd tried to keep in the shadows. In the dining room downstairs, Richard and Margaret Hart sat in uncomfortable silence. Richard sipped his scotch, the amber liquid swirling in his glass, while Margaret stared blankly at the untouched cup of tea in front of her. Evelyn's email had shaken them more than either was willing to admit. "I never thought she'd say something like that," Margaret finally murmured, her voice barely audible. Richard grunted, his jaw tightening. "She's always been outspoken, this isn't new." "But it's different now," Margaret said, her tone defensive. "She's not just complaining about Claudia anymore. She's pointing a finger at us." Richard sighed heavily, setting his glass down with a soft clink. "Maybe we deserve it." Margaret looked at him sharply. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Richard replied, his voice firm. "We've favored Claudia for years, turned a blind eye to things we shouldn't have. And Evelyn, we've let her feel like an outsider in her own family." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't respond, but her silence spoke volumes. Upstairs, Amelia sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, crayons scattered around her. A piece of paper lay in front of her, adorned with colorful swirls and hearts. She wrote carefully, her small hands clutching a pink marker as she added the finishing touches to her letter. "Dear Aunt Evie," she began, her tongue poking out in concentration as she spelled out the words. "I heard Mommy and Grandpa talking about you. They said mean things, but I don't think they're right. You're the nicest person I know. I want to be like you when I grow up." Amelia paused, tapping her chin with the marker. She added one more line. "I hope you know how much I love you." Folding the paper neatly, she slipped it into an envelope and placed it on her nightstand. She didn't fully understand the tension between her mother and her aunt, but she knew one thing. She didn't want Aunt Evie to feel sad or alone. Claudia's anxiety only deepened as the evening wore on. She found herself pacing the living room after Mark had gone to bed, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Evelyn's email wasn't just a warning, it was a threat, a reminder that the truths Claudia had buried could be unearthed at any moment. Finally, unable to stand the silence any longer, Claudia picked up her phone and dialed her mother. "Claudia, it's late," Margaret said in lieu of a greeting. Her tone was weary, tinged with irritation. I know, but we need to talk about Evelyn, Claudia said, her voice low and urgent. Margaret sighed. What about her? Her email, Claudia snapped. She's trying to make me look like the villain. Margaret hesitated. Maybe you should talk to her. Talk to her? Claudia repeated, incredulous. What good would that do? She's just trying to tear this family apart. Or maybe she's trying to make us see something we've been ignoring, Margaret said quietly. Claudia froze, her grip tightening on the phone. You're taking her side? I'm not taking sides, Margaret said firmly. I'm just saying, maybe it's time we stop pretending everything is fine. Claudia ended the call without another word, her mother's words echoing in her mind. She sank into the couch, burying her face in her hands. For the first time, the weight of her carefully constructed life felt unbearable. In her Denver apartment, Evelyn sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, but she ignored it, lost in thought. Sending the email had been an act of defiance, a declaration that she wouldn't be silenced anymore. But it had also been a risk, one that could either force her family to confront their dysfunction or push them further away. As she sat there, the faint hum of a notification drew her attention. She picked up her phone, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name on the screen. Claudia. The message was short, but its implications were clear. We need to talk. Evelyn stared at the words, her mind racing. For the first time in years, she felt like the power was shifting, and for once, it was in her hands. The morning light filtered into the bedroom of Claudia and Mark's suite at the Rosewood Mansion. Everything about the room exuded elegance, golden curtains, carefully arranged flowers, and furniture polished to perfection. But for Claudia, it all felt oppressive, a constant reminder of the fragile image she worked so hard to maintain. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, his brow furrowed, holding the bank statement he had just found. The numbers were unmistakable, debt that Claudia had meticulously hidden from him for months. His face was a mixture of confusion and anger as he turned toward her. Claudia, he said, his voice steady but heavy with disappointment. What is this? How long have you been hiding this from me? Claudia froze, her mind racing for an explanation. She reached for the statement, but Mark pulled it away, holding it just out of reach. You need to start being honest with me, he continued. We're supposed to be partners, but this feels like betrayal. It's not what it looks like, Claudia said, her voice faltering. I just didn't want to worry you. Things have been tight, but it's nothing I can't fix. Mark's jaw tightened as he stared at her, the trust in his eyes giving way to disbelief. Fix, he echoed bitterly. Claudia, this isn't just a rough patch. This is a pattern. And it's not just about money, it's about trust. How can I believe anything you say when you've been keeping something this big from me? Claudia's carefully composed exterior began to crack. She wanted to deflect, to shift the blame, but she saw the hurt in Mark's eyes and realized she had pushed him to the edge. You don't understand, Claudia said, her voice rising slightly, laced with desperation. Do you know what it's like to constantly be compared? To feel like if you're not perfect, you're nothing? My parents. Don't put this on your parents, Mark interrupted, his voice firm but not angry. This isn't about them, this is about us. I'm standing right here, Claudia, trying to understand why you felt you couldn't tell me the truth, and all I'm hearing is excuses. Tears welled up in Claudia's eyes, and she turned away, unable to meet his gaze. I didn't want to disappoint you, she whispered. Mark exhaled, his frustration momentarily giving way to sorrow. Claudia, I married you. Not the perfect version of you that you think everyone expects, but you, the real you. And now I don't even know who that is anymore. His words hit harder than she expected, leaving her breathless. For the first time, Claudia saw the walls she had built around herself for what they were. Not protection, but isolation. Later that day, the Hart family gathered in the mansion's private sitting room. The air was thick with tension as Mark confronted Richard and Margaret, holding the same statement he had shown Claudia. Did you know about this? He asked, his voice sharper than usual. How long have you been bailing her out? Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat while Margaret's face turned pale. Neither of them answered immediately, and the silence spoke volumes. I'll take that as a yes, Mark said, his tone colder now. So this is how it works? You just enable her, cover for her, and let the rest of us deal with the fallout? Mark, it's not that simple, Richard began, his voice defensive. We've always done what we thought was best for the family. Best for the family? Mark repeated, his disbelief evident. You've been lying to protect her, and now we're all paying the price. Don't you see how toxic this is? Before Richard could respond, Amelia entered the room, clutching a small drawing in her hands. She hesitated at the doorway, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" she asked softly. The room fell silent. Margaret forced a smile and gestured for Amelia to come closer. "Nothing, sweetheart, just grown-up talk." But Amelia wasn't convinced. Her eyes darted between the adults, finally settling on her father. "Why are you upset?" she asked Mark, her voice laced with concern. Mark knelt down to her level, his expression softening. "It's okay, Amelia. Sometimes grown-ups just have things to work through." Amelia's gaze didn't waver. "Is it about Aunt Evie?" she asked, surprising everyone in the room. "Because I heard you talking about her last night." Margaret stiffened, her composure faltering for a moment. "Amelia, that's enough," she said quickly, her voice sharper than intended. But the damage was done. Amelia's words had struck a chord, forcing the adults to confront the elephant in the room. That evening, Claudia sat alone in her suite, her mind racing. Evelyn's email had been a catalyst, forcing her to confront truths she had long ignored. The cracks in her perfect facade were widening, and for the first time, she wasn't sure she could patch them up. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Evelyn, a simple reply to Amelia's earlier letter. Claudia hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen before opening it. The message was brief but powerful. "Amelia's words remind me why honesty matters. I hope one day we can all see things clearly, even if it hurts at first." Claudia stared at the message, her chest tightening. She wanted to dismiss it as another act of self-righteousness, but deep down, she knew Evelyn was right. The truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it was buried. Meanwhile, Richard and Margaret sat in their own room, the weight of Evelyn's words from the email still lingering. Margaret broke the silence, her voice trembling. "We failed them, didn't we?" Richard didn't respond immediately. He stared out the window, his expression unreadable. "We thought we were helping," he said finally, "but maybe we were just avoiding the hard choices." Margaret nodded, tears welling in her eyes. For years, they had prioritized appearances over substance, believing it was the best way to maintain their family's legacy. Now that legacy was crumbling before their eyes. Evelyn, back in her Denver apartment, sat by her window watching the city lights. She had expected fallout from her email, but not the clarity it had brought. For the first time in years, she felt like she had stepped out of the shadow her family had cast over her life. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Claudia. "We need to talk." Evelyn stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling within her. She didn't know what Claudia wanted, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to face whatever came next. The Denver skyline stretched wide outside Evelyn's apartment window, a mosaic of steel and glass under the soft glow of a winter afternoon. She sat at her desk, sketches and color palettes strewn across its surface, but her focus was elsewhere. Her fingers lingered on the edges of an envelope, its pink paper worn soft from being opened and folded back multiple times. It was Amelia's letter, filled with the untamed handwriting of a 10-year-old and decorated with doodles of flowers and hearts. "Dear Aunt Evie," it began, "I miss you. Daddy and Mommy were fighting again, and I heard your name. I don't know why grown-ups get so mad, but I think you're the only one who makes sense. Can I be like you when I grow up? Love, Amelia." The last line always caught Evelyn off guard, sending a pang of bittersweet longing through her. Amelia's admiration was pure, untainted by the complexities and hypocrisies that marred the Hart family. For her, Evelyn was more than an outsider. She was a beacon of something different, something better. Evelyn leaned back, staring at the ceiling as doubt gnawed at her resolve. She had spent the past few weeks trying to distance herself from the toxicity of her family, determined to protect the life she had painstakingly built. Yet Amelia's words cracked the wall she had carefully constructed. Could fostering a relationship with her niece mean revisiting old wounds? Her mind spiraled with memories, times she had tried to stand up for herself only to be dismissed or belittled. The sting of her father's words, the coldness in her mother's eyes, and the triumph in Claudia's smirk all rose unbidden. She had told herself for years that walking away was the only way to heal, but Amelia complicated that narrative. Would reconnecting mean slipping back into old patterns, or could it be a chance to break the cycle? The thought of failing Amelia, of somehow becoming part of the harm, terrified Evelyn. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Thomas, holding a bag of takeout and wearing his usual disarming grin. "I figured you could use some company," he said, setting the food on the counter. "You've been in hermit mode since Dallas." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You're not wrong." Thomas handed her a pair of chopsticks and took a seat across from her. "So," he began, gesturing toward the letter on the desk. "What's the verdict?" She sighed, twirling noodles absently on her chopsticks. "I don't know, Thomas. Part of me wants to keep the door shut. They've hurt me so many times, and letting them back in feels dangerous." "And the other part?" he prompted gently. Evelyn hesitated. "The other part sees Amelia. She's just a kid caught in the middle of all this mess. She deserves better." Thomas leaned back, studying her. "You don't have to rejoin the circus to be there for her. You can create a new space just for the two of you." The simplicity of his suggestion struck Evelyn. "But what if it backfires? What if I just end up hurting her or making things worse?" "Evelyn," Thomas said firmly, "you're not your parents. You're not Claudia. You've already shown Amelia something different by just being yourself. Maybe that's enough." Evelyn fell silent, letting his words sink in. Could it really be that simple? Could she break the cycle, one small step at a time? Meanwhile, at the Hart residence, Richard and Margaret sat side by side in the living room, an unspoken tension filling the space between them. The aftermath of Evelyn's email still hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over their once impeccable facade. "I tried calling her again," Margaret said quietly, setting down her glass of wine. "No answer, just like the last 5 times." Richard frowned, staring at the crackling fireplace. "She'll come around, she always does." Margaret shook her head. "I'm not so sure this time. She's changed." Richard was silent for a long moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You know, we did this. We created this distance. We made her feel like she didn't belong." Margaret's face tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she looked down at her hands, her voice trembling as she spoke. I thought if we focused on Claudia, on helping her build her life, everything would stay stable. But we pushed Evelyn away in the process. She needed us too, Richard, and we failed her." He nodded, his expression heavy with guilt. "I keep replaying things in my head. Moments I could have stepped in, been better. It's too late to fix the past, but..." Margaret finished his thought, her voice quiet but firm. "It's not too late to try now." Their conversation was interrupted by Amelia's voice drifting from the hallway. "Why doesn't Aunt Evie visit anymore?" Both parents froze. Margaret managed a strained smile as Amelia appeared in the doorway, clutching a drawing of what appeared to be a treehouse. "Your aunt's busy, sweetheart," she said, her tone too sweet to be convincing. "But she's always busy," Amelia protested, her brow furrowing. "I think she's mad at us." Richard cleared his throat. "That's not something you need to worry about." Amelia looked unconvinced, her gaze shifting to the drawing in her hands. "I sent her a letter," she said softly. "Do you think she'll write back?" Margaret faltered, unsure how to respond. "I'm sure she will," she said finally, though her voice wavered. Later that evening, after Thomas left, Evelyn found herself at her desk again, pen in hand. The words didn't come easily, but they came. She poured her thoughts into a letter, careful and deliberate with each sentence. "Dear Amelia, thank you for your letter. It means more to me than you know. I'm sorry things have been hard at home, but I want you to remember something. You are smart, kind, and strong. You don't have to be like anyone else. Not me, not your mom, not anyone. Just be you, because that's enough. I'd love to see you. Maybe we can meet somewhere special, just the two of us. Let me know what you think. With love, Aunt Evie." She sealed the envelope and placed it on the counter, ready for the next day's mail. Back in Denver, Evelyn stared out her apartment window, the city lights glittering against the darkness. She had no illusions that reconnecting with Amelia would be easy, but for the first time she felt a flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could help her niece navigate the storm without losing herself in the process. The park was quiet that morning, with the chill of early winter settling over the bare branches and frost-dappled grass. Amelia sat on a weathered bench near the duck pond, the letter Evelyn had sent her clutched tightly in her gloved hands. She had read it so many times, the folds were starting to fray. Yet each time, the words seemed to carry a little more warmth, a little more hope. Evelyn spotted her niece from a distance and paused, her breath visible in the crisp air. Amelia's small frame, bundled in a bright red coat, stood out against the muted landscape. Evelyn's heart swelled with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. She had played out this meeting in her mind countless times, but now that it was here, she felt the weight of what it could mean. "Amelia," Evelyn called softly as she approached. Amelia looked up, her face lighting up with a smile so wide it seemed to melt away the chill in the air. She leapt up from the bench and ran toward Evelyn, throwing her arms around her waist. "Aunt Evie, you came!" Amelia exclaimed, her voice full of unrestrained joy. Evelyn knelt to meet Amelia's gaze, brushing a stray lock of hair from her niece's face. "Of course I came. I wouldn't miss this for the world." They sat together on the bench, Evelyn pulling out a thermos of hot chocolate she had brought along. As Amelia sipped from the steaming cup, Evelyn let herself savor the simplicity of the moment, the kind of connection she had always craved but had rarely found within her family. "I've missed you," Amelia said after a long pause, her voice quieter now. "It's not the same without you." Evelyn's chest tightened. "I've missed you too, sweetheart, more than you know." Amelia hesitated, her small hands fidgeting with the edge of her scarf. "Why don't you come around anymore? Mommy says it's because you don't like us." Evelyn took a deep breath, carefully choosing her words. "It's not that I don't like you, Amelia. I love you very much. But sometimes grown-ups have to take a step back from things that hurt them. It's the only way to figure out how to grow." "Like a flower?" Amelia asked, her brows furrowing in thought. Evelyn smiled. "Exactly like a flower. Sometimes you need space and sunlight to bloom." Amelia seemed to consider this, nodding slowly. "I want to be like you when I grow up," she said earnestly. "Strong and smart. You don't let anyone tell you what to do." Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. "You already are strong and smart, Amelia. And you can be anything you want to be. Just remember, it's okay to stand up for yourself, even if it feels hard." They talked for a while longer, their conversation weaving between lighthearted laughter and moments of heartfelt connection. Evelyn felt the tension she had carried for weeks begin to loosen, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Amelia wasn't just her niece. She was a symbol of something greater, the possibility of breaking the cycle and building something new. Back at the Rosewood mansion, Claudia sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. The email Evelyn had sent weeks ago still lingered in her mind, its words cutting deeper than she had admitted to anyone. And now the fallout from her financial secrets was unraveling faster than she could control. Mark had left the house that morning without a word, his cold silence more painful than any argument they had ever had. Her parents had begun to pull away too, their support now tinged with quiet judgment and disappointment. For the first time, Claudia felt the precariousness of the life she had built, so polished on the surface, yet so fragile underneath. Her finger hovered over Evelyn's name in her contact list before she finally pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times before Evelyn answered. "Claudia," Evelyn said, her voice neutral. There was a pause on the other end before Claudia spoke. "Evelyn, I don't know where to start." "Start with the truth," Evelyn said simply. Claudia exhaled shakily. "I've made a mess of everything. Mark, the money, the family. I don't know how to fix it." Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened. She had spent years waiting for Claudia to acknowledge the cracks in their relationship, to show vulnerability instead of superiority. And now that it was happening, Evelyn felt a cautious mix of empathy and wariness. "I can't fix it for you," Evelyn said gently. "But I can tell you this, pretending everything is perfect won't make it better. It's okay to admit you're struggling. It's okay to ask for help." Claudia's voice wavered. "I don't know if they'll forgive me." "Maybe they will, maybe they won't," Evelyn replied. "But forgiveness starts with yourself." Claudia fell silent, and Evelyn could hear the faint sound of her breathing, uneven and uncertain. Finally, Claudia whispered, "Do you think we could talk more, sometime soon?" Evelyn hesitated, then nodded to herself. "Yes, Claudia, we can." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Evelyn and Amelia walked toward the park's edge. Amelia's hand was small but firm in Evelyn's, a tangible reminder of what mattered most. "Will I see you again soon?" Amelia asked as they reached the street. Evelyn knelt down, brushing a speck of dirt from Amelia's coat. "You can count on it," she said with a smile. "And next time, maybe we'll build that treehouse of yours." Amelia grinned, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Promise?" "Promise," Evelyn said, sealing it with a pinky swear. As Amelia ran off to meet her father, Evelyn stood for a moment watching her niece disappear into the distance. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt a sense of peace, not because everything was resolved, but because she had chosen a path forward, one rooted in honesty and hope. With a deep breath, she turned and walked toward her car, the seeds of change firmly planted. Evelyn's story reminds us that growth often begins with difficult conversations and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. Whether it's standing up for yourself, offering forgiveness, or breaking free from toxic cycles, the path to healing is rarely easy, but always worthwhile. Have you ever been in Evelyn's shoes, choosing between preserving peace or standing your ground? What lessons have you learned from navigating family dynamics? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, leave a or tell us where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, challenge, and resonate with life's messy beauty. Together, let's keep planting seeds of change.